Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. After years of border closures and a generally anti-Hamas attitude, it appears that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is moving towards a reconciliation deal with the Gaza-based Islamist group. Recent meetings between Egyptian and Hamas officials have led to new security arrangements between Hamas and Egypt on the Gaza border, and that's not all. Hamas officials are lauding their new arrangements with Egypt, which could help the terror group with its electricity issues now that the Palestinian Authority has stopped paying their electric bill.
وما زيارات وفودنا المتتالية إلى مصر الشقيقة إلا تأكيدا على هذا المسعى. وقد وجدنا من الإخوة المسؤولين كل الاستعداد للعمل من أجل معالجة أزمات غزة. وصدرت الأوامر والتعليمات من الجهات الرسمية في مصر لتنفيذ حزمة من الإجراءات والسياسات، وبدأ ذلك بدخول الوقود المصري إلى محطة توليد الكهرباء.
The signs of this new arrangement are already visible on the border.
الآن اتخذ قرار بتسوية هذه المنطقة وأن يكون هناك مجال للرؤية والمتابعة كذلك من قبل الأمن الوطني وكذلك من قبل الجانب المصري. الآن سيتم وضع كاميرات وسيتم وضع أسلاك سائكة وسيتم تسوية هذه السواتر والأشجار الأشجار التي تمنع وتحد من رؤية الإخوة في الأمن الوطني حتى تتمكن قوة الأمن الوطني من أداء مهامها بشكل سهل.
But that's not all that's happening. We've been hearing rumors that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's former rival Mohammed Dahlan may return to the Gaza Strip and share control with Hamas. Some of his key allies have already entered the coastal territory. If this happens, it'll lower the already slight chances for the Palestinian Authority to take back the area. The French President Emmanuel Macron met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas yesterday, and he has some strong criticism for Israeli colonialism. The two leaders met at the Elysee Palace in France, where they signed an agreement to establish a French-language high school in the Palestinian capital of Ramallah and agreed to organize a joint seminar over the next few months. Macron had some scathing words for Israel.
La solution des deux États à laquelle il n'existe aucune alternative viable est aujourd'hui mise en péril, sur le terrain bien sûr, mais peut-être encore davantage dans les esprits. Et les causes de cette érosion sont malheureusement connues. La France a toujours condamné et condamne la poursuite de la colonisation, qui est illégale au regard du droit international.
This is the first time that Macron has publicly spoken about his approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, although he has been opposed to unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state. The French leader is widely seen as more pro-Israel than his predecessor François Hollande and has publicly taken a strong stance against BDS. France has held a pro-Arab line since the 1960s, when then-leader Charles de Gaulle canceled arms sales to Israel and imposed an arms embargo. In 1969, Israeli naval commandos sailed several naval boats out of a French harbor that Israel had paid for and France had refused to deliver. In 2016, France voted for a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements, including in Jerusalem. The French leader is expected to host Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in Paris on July 16th for the 75th anniversary of the infamous Veldiv roundup of Parisian Jews during the Second World War. Israel is now moving forward with plans to build new housing units in various parts of East Jerusalem and the surrounding areas across the 1949 armistice lines, and it's causing a major uproar. ILTV correspondent Max Keisler has more details on the story. Now, Max, what has the response been from the United States?
We've seen a pretty weak response from the U.S., all things considered, especially compared to previous administrations. In 2016, when Israel announced the Amichai settlement, the Obama administration strongly condemned it, whereas now we're seeing language from the Trump administration about expressing concern over settlement construction, and yet at the same time saying that settlement freezes haven't advanced peace talks in the past.
So, in other words, you're saying that this is not necessarily condemnation.
I think it's ambiguous language. It doesn't read like a condemnation. If the U.S. wanted it to read like a condemnation, it would. And you know what? I'm sure Israel's getting that message. Israel is set to approve 800 new homes in Jewish-populated areas of East Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, including Pisgah Ze'ev in the northeast and Gilo in the southwest. All these neighborhoods are considered settlements by much of the world, but Israel says they're an integral part of the country's capital. Israel's been holding back for years on building in Jerusalem, having faced heavy pressure from former U.S. President Barack Obama to refrain from construction in the area. But the response from President Donald Trump's administration is a lot more ambivalent. The statement says that President Trump has publicly and privately expressed his concerns regarding settlements, but it adds that the administration recognizes that past demands for a settlement freeze have not helped advance peace talks. Israeli rightists will likely take this as a green light to build.
UNESCO has passed yet another resolution condemning Israeli presence in the Old City and East Jerusalem, and the Israeli Foreign Ministry is outraged. ILTV's Aaron Ports has more on the story. Now, Aaron, what is so outrageous about this?
So the resolution, which was brought forth by Jordan, calls Israel the occupying power of the Old City and claims that, quote, the persistent excavations, tunneling, and other illegal practices in East Jerusalem jeopardize the safety of the Old City and its walls. Undoubtedly, Israeli officials are quite upset by this and by these allegations, and they're responding with their own allegations of hypocrisy and slander. So
let's check out your report.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah party is calling the resolution a form of historic justice. Meanwhile, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, however, is expressing contempt for the bizarre and irrelevant decision. The Foreign Ministry's statement says that, quote, UNESCO is acting on behalf of the enemies of history and the truth. It is sad, unnecessary, and pathetic, end quote. The statement also makes special effort to note that the resolution in question failed to get a majority of votes. UNESCO is set to vote on another controversial resolution about the Old City of Hebron soon, and the Israeli government has already been equally forceful in rejecting the legitimacy of the UN organization's initiative there. Just last weekend, during a 2-day UN panel on the Israeli occupation, Israeli ambassador to the UN Dani Danon called for UNESCO and any other anti-Israel UN body to be dissolved.
We open with breaking news from Jerusalem. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just lifted the ban preventing Knesset members from visiting the Temple Mount. It's been 18 months since the restriction was put in place during the heat of the stabbing intifada, which many claim was kicked off by rhetoric from Palestinian officials claiming that Israelis were desecrating the holy site with their, quote, filthy feet. Knesset member and religious freedom activist Yehuda Glick was a major force behind the change. Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism, is one of the most controversial subjects in the region. Under the status quo, Jews are forbidden from praying there, even though 2 Jewish activists held a secret wedding at the site last Thursday. The front of the Israeli Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem was crowded with people on Saturday night, but it wasn't for a celebratory reason. Over 500 people were there as part of an ongoing protest against Netanyahu's decision to freeze plans for a permanent egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall. The protest was staged by hundreds of Reform and conservative Jews who held up signs reading Western Wall for an entire Jewish nation and religious freedom in Israel. The Israeli government approved a plan in January of 2016 to officially recognize a separate pluralistic prayer section at the Robinson's Arch, which is just adjacent to the main Western Wall prayer wall. The compromise was reached after years of negotiations between liberal and American Jewish groups and Israeli officials, giving non-Orthodox Jewish leaders a joint role in overseeing the site. But because of major pushback from powerful ultra-Orthodox members of Netanyahu's current government coalition, the decision has now been frozen. The Israeli Prime Minister's office initially downplayed the move, claiming that anyone who wishes to pray according to conservative or Reform customs can still do so at today's existing facility. But the outrage is clear. Major Jewish diaspora groups are pushing Netanyahu to resolve the crisis, warning that support for Israel will begin to deteriorate and that the decision could ultimately impact financial contributions to the nation. There's been a big turnover in the Israeli Labor Party now that former party leader Isaac Herzog has fallen behind in the primaries and will not be making it to the second round. Former party leader Amir Peretz and Labor newcomer Avi Gabay are currently in a runoff for party leadership, and ILTV's Max Keisler has more details. Max?
This is a party that was in power for 3 decades and hasn't been in power since 2001. A child who was born the last time Labor was in power, they're an adult now, so they really need a winning formula to get out of the opposition. Maybe it's Amir Peretz, he already had his chance to run the party. Maybe it's Avi Gabay, he did just get an endorsement from former Prime Minister Ehud Barak.
Well, let's check out your report to see the details.
Former Israeli Defense Minister and Labor Party leader Amir Peretz has received 32% of the vote in Labor Party primaries, putting him in the lead. Peretz says he's convinced he will win in the second round, after which he will replace Netanyahu. The mysterious Avi Gabay finished in second with 27% of the vote. Gabay has no history in the Labor Party and is not an active Knesset member. He was appointed to the Netanyahu government in 2015 as part of Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party, but he never ran in an election, and it's unclear if he'd even be allowed to serve as head of the opposition if he wins the primary. Labor Party members are disgruntled with former leader Isaac Herzog, who they see as overly friendly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Herzog reportedly held secret coalition talks with Netanyahu last year, although they came to nothing.
All right, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert is leaving prison almost a year early despite the police attention he attracted during his 16-month incarceration. In February of 2016, Olmert began his 27-month sentence for graft at the minimum security Masyahu prison in central Israel. He'd been found guilty of accepting bribes over massive real estate deals and tampering with witnesses. At the time, his attorneys had been pushing for the disgraced prime minister to serve his sentences concurrently in one 18-month period. It sounds like they've done better than what they've ever dreamed of. Olmert was released on parole early Sunday morning and has returned to one of his homes in Tel Aviv, according to media reports. During his time in prison, Olmert began working on his memoirs, and just last month, police raided his editor's home and his publisher's office on suspicion that they were in possession of classified material. In May, one of Olmert's lawyers was detained after being found with classified documents, and more of the kind were found in the embattled leader's prison cell. But it sounds like this wasn't enough to prevent his early release.
מה שהוא אמר לי אני לא אומר לך, אני אומר לך שהוא היה מאוד נרגש, הוא היה מאוד שמח, והוא הרגיש שמה שהוא ביקש אכן מתקיים, וטוב שכך.
The Prime Minister of India arrived in Israel yesterday, and he's getting the full VIP treatment from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On his first full day in Israel, Netanyahu accompanied Narendra Modi on a spontaneous trip to the grave of the early Zionist leader Theodor Herzl, plus a lengthy visit to Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Memorial. Modi was visibly affected by the experience.
Yad Vashem tells us that those who believe in humanity and civilized values must come together and defeat it at all costs. As such, we must resolutely oppose the evils of terrorism, radicalism, and violence that plague our time.
Netanyahu says it's a new era for Israel and Indian relations. He's had close personal relations with Modi since 2014, but aside from that, he's pointing to the country's shared values as a reason for closer ties.
Prime Minister, we share a bond of democracy and creativity, a deep respect for the past, a boundless optimism for the future. And it's in this spirit, my friend Narendra, in this spirit of close cooperation and deepest friendship, that I welcome you here to our home in Jerusalem. Welcome, friend.
Thank you.
Of course, another thing that brings Israel and India closer together is shared threats. Among other things, Modi came to Israel to sign some major defense deals, and before the Netanyahu-Modi honeymoon ever began, the two nations were already cooperating on security issues.
Alongside building a partnership for shared economic prosperity, we are also cooperating to secure our societies against common threats such as terrorism. A progressive partnership in all these areas would shape the scope of my conversation with Prime Minister, my friend Netanyahu.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin returned similar words of praise for the visiting diplomat as well.
I say with the all respect that I have and the pleasure that I have, that you are one of the greatest leaders of the democracies in the world in this time. And we appreciate very much your visit to Israel. We have a lot in common. We are doing a lot in common. We understood very well your thoughts about the need to have partners who will make in.
Now here's something interesting. As a final surprise for the day, Israel announced that the state is honoring Modi by naming a new flower after the Indian Prime Minister himself. A white chrysanthemum developed right here at a farm near Tel Aviv. The head of the IDF military intelligence is confirming reports that Iran has set up a weapons factory in Lebanon, and this puts Israel in a real dilemma. Over the last few days, Arab newspapers have been publishing reports about an Iranian weapons manufacturing plant in Lebanon. Well, Major General Herzl Halevi has just confirmed that it exists, and that's a problem. Israeli airstrikes on Iranian weapons convoys from Syria to Lebanon, as well as sea shipments, have been effective, but maybe too effective. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has decided it's more efficient to just build weapons in Lebanon. The question now is if Israel will attack the weapons factory and risk a full-blown war with Hezbollah. Reportedly, they're hoping to solve the issue diplomatically, but considering that Hezbollah is in effective control of the Lebanese government, Lebanon is unlikely to budge. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman says that Israel doesn't intend to go to war with Lebanon, but this weapons factory might change their calculations.
The USS George HW Bush has docked off the coast of Haifa for the last few days now, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to visit the United States Navy sailors yesterday in the first visit by a world leader to the Nimitz-class ship. Netanyahu and his wife Sarah landed on the deck of the aircraft carrier on a military helicopter, after which they were given a tour of the 333-meter-long nuclear-powered ship. The George H.W. Bush can carry a crew of over 5,000 people and around 90 fighter jets and helicopters. The Prime Minister was quite impressed by the ship and had positive words for the crew.
The brave crew that works off this ship helps keep the world secure from the threat of terror. This carrier has served as a base for airstrikes against the Islamic State, and the war against ISIS should be seen for what it is, a clash between good and evil.
The George H.W. Bush is too large to enter the Haifa port, but reportedly a number of United States sailors have found their way into Israel to enjoy the onshore nightlife. Still, they've got an important job in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they're going to have to get back to work soon.
This aircraft carrier and this air wing have been a large part of the war against ISIS over the last 5 months that we've been deployed. We've conducted sustained operations as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, countering ISIS in both Iraq and Syria.
The diplomatic crisis in the Gulf Arab states is escalating. Qatar has missed the deadline to reconcile to the demands of Saudi Arabia and end the blockade, and U.S. President Donald Trump appears to be giving his support to the Saudis. ILTV correspondent Max Keisler has more now. Max, what should Israel be doing in this situation?
That's a difficult question. Israel doesn't really have diplomatic or trade ties with any of the countries involved in this scuffle. And while they do have some shared interests with Saudi Arabia while it comes to Qatar, any perception that the Jewish state was really taking a side here could just create difficulties.
Now, what could it mean for Israel if there is a diplomatic break in the Gulf?
Well, we're already seeing Qatar and Turkey become much closer, and also some alignment between Iran and Turkey when it comes to the Kurdish question. It's like we're seeing the formation of a power bloc here, and honestly, one that's quite hostile to Israel. On the other hand, this could create opportunities with the Arab states in the same way the Iranian threat has. Let's take a closer look.
Since June 5th, Qatar's airspace and ports have been blockaded, and its only land border with Saudi Arabia has been sealed off. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt and Bahrain have issued a list of demands for Qatar to restore relations with its neighbors. They expect the country to shut down Al Jazeera, scale down its ties with Iran, and stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and Hezbollah. The first deadline to respond passed yesterday, and Qatar is remaining bellicose, saying it doesn't fear military action. With hundreds of Turkish troops stationed in Qatar, they may well have powerful allies in the event of war.
There is no fear from whatever action it's been taken. Qatar is prepared to face whatever consequences it is. But as I have mentioned to you that there is an international law which should not be violated, and there is a border which should not be crossed. And these countries and Qatar is in a region which is considered a center of stability in a turbulence region. So there is, I think, enough wisdom in avoiding such an irresponsible action against Qatar or against any country.
U.S. President Donald Trump has spoken with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, and he's reiterating the importance of stopping terrorist financing and discrediting extremist ideology, according to a White House press release. For Israel, the further isolation of an Iranian ally and Hamas patron could advance its security position, but it's unlikely the Jewish state will get involved in this conflict. Qatar is expected to deliver a formal response to the Arab state's demands tomorrow.
There's no denying that Israel has been on the map lately when it comes to the international success of our favorite celebs, from the worldwide adored Gal Gadot to our recently engaged Daniela Pick. Now, ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh is here again to update us on another Israeli star who's definitely worth keeping up with. Emmanuel?
Yes. Israel has been hot when it comes to exposure and headlines in the American media. An Israeli basketball star, Omri Casspi, has just signed the Golden State Warriors for a modest $2.1 million contract.
No big deal.
No big deal. So let's see more details in my report. The Golden State Switch will be the 6th NBA team for the 29-year-old Casspi during his 8 seasons in the league. He started off in Sacramento, where tensions with coach David Jorger quickly helped him transfer over to the New Orleans, where he unfortunately got injured during his first game. By the end of that season, he was signed with Minnesota, which didn't leave much of a mark on his career, and that finally led him to the Warriors. It's no surprise that Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant signed a new contract with the Warriors over the summer as well, making this team seem like they could win another championship. But guess we'll have to wait and see.
In an effort to make good on her claims that she does not lip sync at her performances, Britney Spears showed Tel Aviv last night just how hard she works even during a crazy heat wave. And ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh joins me in the studio to give us the rundown. Emmanuel?
Yes.
Join me.
Tell me. Will.
So did she or did she not lip sync? This is the major question.
Okay, well, first of all, she buzzed through her main hits and some less popular songs. She went through that for her performance. It was close to impossible for the 55,000 fans that came to visit and came to cheer her on.
What was that all?
To notice if there was lip sync or if it was. If there wasn't, the camera stayed away from close-ups, that's for sure. And she sounded a little fried in her main song, Toxic, but then she sounded pitch perfect in her other songs, so it's a little unanswered.
Maybe that's a sign of nature, you know, rather than
sounding
automation.
Fried a little bit and then pitch perfect.
If you're bouncing back and forth, maybe there's some play going on in there.
You never know, you never know.
All right, well, let's check out your report.
Yeah.
Thousands of fans who paid upwards of 330 shekels per ticket were just happy to see their childhood pop princess strutting her stuff on the Tel Aviv stage. Who can believe it's actually been 19 years since Spears began her worldwide career as a little schoolgirl in Hit Me Baby One More Time, gracing us with 2 decades of controversial headlines. One thing is for sure, aside from all the crazy costume changes and dramatic turns on stage, it is clear to see that she may have been busting her ass out there, but her backup dancers were busting theirs twice as hard. As for Spears' fans, they didn't seem to buy the whole smoke and mirror-filled show, at times rocking out to the beat of hits they recognized, while at others barely even paying attention. Whatever is said about Spears, there's no denying that she's one of the most talked about artists of all time, starting her career as the best-selling album by a teenage solo artist after debuting Oops, I Did It Again in 2000. Britney, you will always be a star.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.